my way all over the place. A week ago at this time, I wasn't even planning on being here. And just last Sunday, I come home from church, and my wife and I had to go to different services because our children were sick. So she went early, and I went late. And I came home, and she goes, I really think you need to go to the men's conference because I just feel God telling me that you need to be there. There's something there for you. What she didn't know was about 800 men Sunday morning asked me if I was going to the men's conference either. Every person, I said, are you going to the men's conference? And so Sunday I signed up. On Tuesday, I was having lunch at the Fresno Rescue Mission, and I heard a pastor talk about a message from 2 Kings that I'd never heard before. It was a story out of 2 Kings, and when I left there, I was really kind of convicted, and it really made me reflect on my walk. And Wednesday, I get a call, and the voice says, Jeff Chin, Pastor Todd Harris, I want you to do your testimony Saturday night in the Tabernacle. So after a long pause, I said, okay. So that story was 2 Kings chapter 7, and verse 3 and 4 say, Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, Why stay here until we die? If we say, we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we'll die. If we stay here, we'll die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die. See, I was in a similar situation as these lepers a few years ago. Diane and I had been married for about 2 years, but our relationship had deteriorated and our marriage was in a shambles. I had bought into the worldview that God just wanted me to be happy, and happiness wasn't to be found in my marriage. It wasn't long before we were separated and headed for divorce, and to make matters worse, I was involved in a relationship with another woman. So there I was faced with a situation where I had to make a decision. I could go back and relive not only all the hurt and pain that I was feeling, but all the hurt and pain that I had caused. And the Bible is clear that going back to the old way leads to death. My other option was just stay in the sinful relationship that I was having with a woman who I wasn't married to. I could just keep the status quo and just stay in my comfort zone and just be stagnant, but that way also leads to death. But God wants us to move forward because Jesus has redeemed us from our past. In fact, if we look at Lot's wife as an example, probably shouldn't even look back, let alone go there. And even in that dark time, I could feel God pulling on me. And just like the lepers decided in verse 4, I decided that I needed to move. And I love the words the Bible uses because the lepers say, let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. That's the only way I was going to move forward. To end my fidelity, to really renew my relationship with Diane, I had to surrender. And yes, I had considered myself to be a Christian, but I had never really surrendered to God. I'm not going to lie to you and say that it was easy and it happened overnight, but there were 2 unforgettable moments that God orchestrated that really helped me along my way. And first was finding out about a program that Northwest used to sponsor called Redwood. And maybe some of you remember it. God used that program and the couples who were sharing their stories to completely break me down and take responsibility for my choices. Redwood gave me the first glimpse of hope in our marriage, that it could not only survive, but really thrive. Not perfect, not without hurts, but now we realize we were being fireproofed. And the movie says, fireproof doesn't mean that fire will never come, but when it does come, you'll be able to withstand it. And the second thing that happened was seeing how God had worked in Diane to change her. When we reunited, I saw someone who was so filled with the Spirit that she was able to forgive my betrayal, something that I thought was impossible. And she'll be the first one to tell you that it was only through Jesus that she acquired that peace to forgive me. One thing that I didn't mention was that Diane wasn't a believer when we were married. We were actually baptized together on our first Easter as a married couple. So it's just another way that God can work. He brought an unbeliever into my life, used my poor choices to bring me closer to him. So not only is our marriage now fully restored, my relationship with Jesus was also renewed. And incidentally, Diane and I celebrated our 10th anniversary last August. But the story doesn't end there. And here's a few more verses from 2 Kings. In verse 5, it says, "At dusk, they, the lepers, got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, 'Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us.' So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank and carried away silver and gold and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also." So again, just like the lepers, when I surrendered, we were blessed. We were blessed with a renewed marriage that is better than either of us could have imagined. Then we were blessed with our daughter Sydney, who was born almost 3 years to the day after I walked out on Diane. And just like it says in 2 Kings, God blessed us abundantly with the birth of our twins, Madeline and Alexander, about 22 months ago. God has promised to provide for our needs, and he has. Not necessarily our wants, but our every need. For me, surrender is a daily action that I still struggle, and I do still struggle occasionally. However, I find it gets easier every day. And the founder of the Salvation Army, William Booth, once said, "The greatness of a man's power is the measure of his surrender." And lastly, remember in verse 8, the lepers hid their plunder. And in verse 9, it goes on to say, "Then they said to each other, 'We're not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves.' And that's why I'm here." When I was asked to share this good news, I was asked to share this good news because it wouldn't be right to keep it to myself. If any of you haven't made that decision to surrender to Jesus and feel God tugging on you, talk to one of these pastors or one of the leaders here. Just like the men in the story, you've got 3 options. You can either go back to the old way, you can stay where you are, or you can surrender. You can surrender and move towards the destiny that God has planned for you.